also like to toast all the ladies that are here. Whenever you're in a male organization, we always have to toast the women. Here's to our wives and our lovers.
Here, here.
May they never meet. I'm going to base, I have my own reflections. I also have quotations from a book written by Robert W. Harper called Old Gloucester County and the American Revolution. And this book opens up here. In addition to the above exciting events, an attempt was made to bring to further light and focus the contributions of Brigadier General Silas Newcomb of the South Jersey Militia, Reed, West Jersey. Newcomb and his men fought bravely with George Washington at the Battle of Long Island on August 28, 1776, and were with him during the dreary days of retreat over the Hudson River and through the state of New Jersey until Washington's troops approached the outskirts of Trent. It must be confessed that I have long wanted to restore the dignity of General Newcomb and the South Jersey Militia from Gloucester, Atlantic, Burlington, Cape May, Cumberland, and Salem counties, where the militia has been castigated by many writers of history, past, present, for his role in the defense of Fort Billings and Mercer. As will be seen, a revisionist approach has revealed that Newcomb's South Jersey Militia Brigade and West Jersey Artillery at Morristown in North Jersey and Princeton and elsewhere distinguished themselves in the Delaware Valley. For too long in my life, I did not even realize that I was related to General Newcomb. It wasn't until we went to Greenwich, which people there call Greenwich and Bridgeton. The monument to the tea burners there has what is reportedly his brother and his name as part of the tea burners. Some people say no, that's his son, and both his sons there. Doesn't matter. That's the first time I realized that I was descended from him. And also the first time I found out how he was viewed as some kind of a joke in the Army and why this was for a man that had so many accomplishments under his belt. I'll tell you what kind of man he was. Cumberland County, New Jersey, March 6, 1775. The Committee of the County of Cumberland, that's the Committee of Safety, in New Jersey met at Bridgetown, and after reading the Association of the American Congress, it appeared by voluntary declaration of Silas Newcomb, Esquire, a member of the committee, that he had contravened the same and an open violation of the third article of the aforesaid association had drank East India tea in his family ever since the first day of March instant, and that he is determined to persist to be in the same practice. After much time spent in vain to convince Mr. Newcomb of his error, it was agreed that it is the duty of this committee, agreeable to the 11th article of the above-mentioned compact, to break off all dealings with him, and in this manner publish the truth of the case, that he may be distinguished from the friends of American liberty. A few months later, we have, whereas Silas Newcomb, Esquire, was in March last advertised by the Committee of said county for a breach of the Association of the Continental Congress, and having since manifested desire of making a public acknowledgment for his former misconduct, the committee accepted of the following recantation. I, the subscriber, do hereby publicly acknowledge my former error and voluntarily confess myself to blame for obstinacy, refusing to submit to a majority of the committee, and I do hereby ask pardon of the members of the committee for the abuses offered them and promise for the future to regulate my conduct agreeable to the aforesaid association and a majority of said committee witnessed by my hand, 11th day of May, 1775, Silas Newcomb. Silas Newcomb came home from the tea burning with breeches full of tea. He was determined that he was going to drink that tea up before, not let it go to waste. That's what he was charged with. As soon as the tea was gone, he went back onto the committee. Beginning in the 1640s, many early New England families migrated to West Jersey. Whalers from Long Island Sound following their prey, farmers looking for better soil, better weather, cheaper land from Connecticut. That's why we have New England Crossroads and Fairfield and Fairton. And some fleeing Indian wars and persecution for religious belief in Massachusetts. The Pequot Wars sent a lot of people here. Many old South Jersey families were New Englanders first. The Newcombs were part of the mass migration of English people that followed the Mayflower, settling in Massachusetts. Captain Joseph Newcomb, a prominent citizen of Edgartown on Martha's Vineyard, heard good things about a Connecticut settlement in West Jersey and moved his family there in 1732. That has to be my relatives. They leave Martha's Vineyard and then come to Cumberland County, New Jersey. A year later, in 1733, Captain Joseph died, leaving 6 children. The youngest son, Silas, born in 1723, married a local girl, Bathsheba Dayton, isn't that a great name? And became a very well-liked and respected citizen, appearing as administrator on many wills, 3 of which named him as guardian of orphaned children. He was elected sheriff of Cumberland County. He was a lieutenant in the French and Indian War. I don't know if anybody, I don't usually use movies for comparison, but has anybody ever seen The Last of the Mohicans with Day-Lewis? Yeah. In that movie, do you remember when in Fort William Henry they marched out to the drums and Montcalm let them leave and before they could get away the Indians attacked them? Well, Silas Newcomb was in that bunch that marched out of Fort William Henry. He was lieutenant in the French and Indian War, and at the formation of the 1,000-man 1st New Jersey Regiment called the Jersey Blues in 1755, was promoted to captain and took part in the victory at Quebec. In 1776, he was a colonel in the Continental Army. He fought at the battles of Long Island and Trenton. He was commissioned a Brigadier General of Militia in March 1776, taking part in the Battle of Billingsport and Fort Mercer. In these 2 last battles, things began to sour for him. He realized that his South Jersey militia was considered expendable by the Continental Army High Command, and that South Jersey Tories attacked the farms whose menfolk were away at the war. Cumberland County was 1/3 Quaker, 1/3 Loyalist, and 1/3 Patriot. When the Patriots were away from their farms, their barns burned, their cows were murdered. It was not a pleasant situation, leaving the wife and children home in the war zone to go to what might be a war zone, might not. And then when I was doing the genealogy, I came across a letter that was written from George Washington to my ancestor, Silas Newcomb. Sir, the enemy seem determined to possess themselves, if possible, of the forts on the river. Their operations against Fort Mifflin have been carried on for several days with unremitted attention, and from various accounts they mean to storm Red Bank or to invest it. For this purpose, it is confidently said that the great considerable detachment crossed the river yesterday morning. It is of infinite importance to us to prevent them from effecting these objects. I therefore request you to give every aid in your power to that end. If they have or attempt to invest the fort, I hope you will be able to fall on their rear with such a respectable number of militia as to make them decline the project. And if that should not be the case, it may be by other means, further detachments being sent from the city to their support, which will afford us perhaps a favorable opportunity of striking a successful blow. I will not enlarge upon the subject. You will afford us perhaps a favorable opportunity of striking a blow, and are sufficiently impressed with the importance of it, and I trust you will exert yourself to render every service you can. The earliest aid should be given. Delay may bring on a loss extremely interesting in its nature and irreparable. I am, etc., etc. P.S. I cannot forbear observing to you and the inhabitants of Jersey the dreadful consequences that must follow should the enemy keep possession of Philadelphia, and that if they get Red Bank in their hands, a considerable force must be subsequently kept there, to the distress and terror of those within their reach. This, I hope, will stimulate the militia to a speedy and vigorous opposition. I must request that you do everything in your power to throw in supplies of provision to Fort Mifflin and Red Bank. I conceive to be a matter of the utmost importance, as the enemy may intend to starve them out. He was ordered to collect his militia from Cumberland County for the defense of Fort Mercer near Woodbury. General Newcomb arrived with 500 volunteers to find no imminent battle and the fort unfinished. He was told his men could stay and help with the digging. The militia troops began to melt away back to their farms and towns, which were also in need of defense. In September, he called out the militia with orders to defend Fort Billings near Paulsboro at any cost. This little dirt fort with 4 cannon aimed at the Delaware River and completely open to the rear was already the target of British forces and was deserted when the militia arrived. Another quote from Mr. Harper's book. In order to make Fort Billings more secure, Newcomb noted that he had sent the rest of his men, about 150, to Billingsport to reinforce the garrison, reserving only a small guard at Woodbury. Taking Newcomb's own figures at face value, the total number of South Jersey militia was approximately 300, hardly enough of a force for the challenge ahead of General Newcomb. On the evening of October 1st, Newcomb was informed that a party of the enemy was landing on this shore opposite Marcus Hook. Their number said to be about 400. I immediately called in my outguards and marched to the height on the Salem Road, about 15 miles below Philadelphia. General Washington had written to the commanding officer at Billingsport, Colonel Bradford of Pennsylvania, that if he thought it indefensible, he ought to evacuate it and destroy the works, which accordingly was done, it being the unanimous opinion of the officers there that the place could not be defended against any considerable force. General Newcomb noted in his report that about 9 in the morning of the 2nd of this month, the enemy advanced within a few hundred yards of where we were drawn up with 2 or 3 field pieces, when a pretty brisk fire from both sides ensued. At this moment, it was discovered that there were not less than 1,500. They, the British, detaching off strong flanking parties, by which we might have soon been surrounded. I thought it prudent to retreat, which we did in tolerable good order, keeping up a constant fire in our rear. The British forces under Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Sterling advanced over Mantua Creek. However, according to Silas Newcomb, they turned back and took possession of Billingsport, not before the Americans removed the stores to this place. As for casualties, General Newcomb reported, I believe we had none killed, nor any badly wounded. Several are missing, but I believe they are mostly, if not all, gone home. The enemy had 3 or 4 killed in Mantua Creek Bridge. We still keep strong pickets at Woodbury and the ferries. I have at present not quite 300 men at my command. It is impossible to get any more under the old militia law. Local scouts estimated the enemy as 500 men at Billingsport. The estimate from Washington's headquarters was 300. It was, in fact, 1,500 men from the 10th and the 42nd Regiments of the British Army. The 42nd Regiment was the famous Black Watch, the most decorated of all King's troops. General Newcomb harassed these regiments with his own 300 troops while not allowing them to be trapped between the enemy and the high banks of the Delaware. The Cumberland County Militia slowed the enemy attack long enough for the abandoned ammunition at Fort Billings to be removed and the cannons spiked by Marines from the Continental Navy boats. Newcomb realized that his collection of farm boys and relatives were almost destroyed by misinformation. For the second time in as many months, the general was ordered to Fort Mercer to augment the garrison. This time the militia was slow and sparse. To make a long story short, the Battle of Red Bank, Fort Mercer, was an initial United Colonies victory, but superior British firepower soon reduced the defenses. Silas Newcomb's company-sized unit harassed the attacking Hessians from the rear, which turned out to be a thankless task with no gunpowder, no artillery, and threadbare troops. Here's a quote from a Hessian officer, Johann Ewald. In fact, he's mentioned in that handout they gave you tonight. What cannot be achieved with such small bands who learn to fight dispersed, who know how to use every molehill, for their defense, and to retreat as quickly when attacked as they advance again, and always find a place to hide. Never have I seen these maneuvers performed better than by American militia, and especially that of the province of New Jersey. Alternately, General Washington said, the conduct of the Jersey militia is infamous. New Jersey is the first Loyalist colony. And of course he was right, it was the first Loyalist colony. Quoting again from Mr. Harper's book, Governor William Livingston of New Jersey, writing from Haddonfield on September 20th, notified Brigadier General Silas Newcomb of Cumberland County, in command of South Jersey militia stationed at Woodbury, that it would be necessary to detach some of Newcomb's men to the main army in Pennsylvania. Livingston noted that he thought it best those now collected at Woodbury should immediately march to join the militia under the immediate command of General Armstrong and to reinforce the command of His Excellency General Washington. Aware that General Newcomb was a veteran of the French and Indian War, as well as the battles of Long Island and White Plains in New York during the summer and fall of 1776, plus remaining with General Washington's retreating army until it crossed over the Delaware River into Pennsylvania, Governor Livingston tried to soothe General Newcomb's possible hurt feelings by assuring him that this detachment, I am persuaded from your zeal for the cause, you would upon this important occasion be desirous of commanding in person, but will attempt to, as in all probability the enemy's fleet, should they land their army with success, will attempt to ravage our coasts. And they may perhaps throw over some troops besides. I think your presence will be more necessary in this state. You will therefore direct Captain Potter to take command of the troops now at Woodbury and to march them with all possible expedition as directed. Livingston was referring to Colonel David Potter, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Potter's Tavern over there in Bridgeton, of the Cumberland County Militia, who was later to become a prisoner of war. There is a small tribute here to Colonel Newcomb. As the British were expected to cross Delaware River to the general area of Billingsport, General Silas Newcomb committed 7 companies of his militia to Mantua Creek and environs. 7 companies were kept in readiness at Woodbury to aid the defense of Fort Mercer, or to move to any point of British invasion of Gloucester County. Cooper's Creek was guarded by 37 men, and a larger force of 60 men was stationed at the important area around the ferry at Gloucester. It is noteworthy that companies were present from Cape May, Cumberland, Gloucester, which included Atlantic at that time, and Salem counties, a tribute to General Silas Newcomb. At this time on the scene came Colonel, later General David Foreman, another militia officer from Monmouth County, who responded to the call for troops with even less success than General Newcomb. He fired off letters to General Washington, removing all responsibility for the Jersey militia's failures from himself and placing them on Cumberland County. Colonel, soon to be General Foreman, was avoiding a summons to Trenton to face charges of embezzlement, misuse of public money, and false swearing. He had gotten money to start salt making. I don't know if anybody realizes how expensive and valuable salt was during this war. That if you worked at a salt works, you were exempt from the army. He had gotten money to start the salt making operation, had gotten soldiers to guard these salt works at government expense, and produced no salt. Furious at this and tired of the constant exertion, as well as Washington's apparent acceptance of Foreman's account of the Fort Mercer campaign, General Silas Newcomb resigned his commission and returned to Fairfield Township. With Fort Mercer temporarily secure in American hands, there developed a friction between leaders of the South Jersey militia, for General Washington had ordered Major General David Foreman to proceed to Red Bank with men under his command from Tom's River. Arriving in the Woodbury area, General Foreman gave orders on October 26th to several of the militia officers of this part of the county to assemble their men. Washington had failed to notify Newcomb of a change in militia command. Foreman reported to Washington that the lower militia and General Newcomb have not as yet produced a single man. As being elder in command than Newcomb, I take the liberty this day to issue orders for their immediate assembling, and will from time to time do everything in my power to assemble them. It was unfortunate that General Foreman was so abrasive towards Silas Newcomb and his loyal militiamen, for they were in Old Gloucester County and stationed in strategic areas. A day later, General Foreman continued his attack upon Silas Newcomb by advising George Washington that from the best information I can collect, he, Newcomb, has at no time given any assistance either to the garrison or the fleet, particularly in the late attack on Red Bank. He either harassed the enemy in their advance, neither during the assault nor in their retreat. Fortunately, General Barnum arrived at Woodbury on November 2nd. His report to Washington, dated November 7, 1777, is interesting in the terms of the Foreman-Newcomb controversy. I have not seen General Foreman, nor can I learn where he is. There are about 60 of his militia at Red Bank. General Newcomb is still here, and his troops may amount to 200. I cannot tell their exact number and believe he cannot. They are badly provided and can be of little service in any serious operation. Indicative of the cooperation, Silas Newcomb informed General Barnum that he had about 500 militia at Woodbury. However, Barnum reported to George Washington that Newcomb's men were principally without ammunition. They are good men and have many good officers with them. It is a pity they cannot be properly furnished. Again, on November the 10th, Barnum reiterated the sorry state of Newcomb's South Jersey militia around Woodbury. It would be serviceable to furnish the militia with ammunition or discharge them. Recently, this is Harper's words, recently it was possible to obtain a valuable document, one apparently unknown previously to the South Jersey historians, from Massachusetts Historical Society. This document, a muster roll, informs us that on November the 12th, 1777, Brigadier General Silas Newcomb, commanding officer of the South Jersey Militia, had 666 officers and men stationed at strategic points. Much mystery remains to what happened to Brigadier General Newcomb, commanding officer of the South Jersey Militia. During the British march to Woodbury and the destruction of Fort Mercer, on November 15th, Brigadier General Barnum had reported to George Washington that the militia are without a command, but he did not indicate that this was a permanent situation. In any event, it appears that Newcomb returned to his home in Cumberland County and that Colonel Ellis of the Gloucester County Militia assumed command. For in a letter dated November 24th, 1777 from Haddonfield, Ellis sent Major General Greene a report of the militia under his command. About 400 effectives at this place and about 100 in the neighborhood below Mantua Creek. General Newcomb had left the Army in excellent order. He had all his paperwork is up to date. I have on the cover of this binder here one of his very neat personal census of his command. He was a general. A general should have had at least a brigade. He had nowhere near that. A colonel would have had a regiment. He had nowhere near that. But he did what he could with what he had. He died a year later in Fairden, Cumberland County, in 1779 at the age of 56. He was worn out and sick from so much rain and sleeping on the cold ground and exertion, and is buried in an unmarked grave. This is what George Washington wrote about General Newcomb. Notwithstanding, I believe that General Newcomb is a gentleman of great goodness and integrity and cannot entertain the slightest doubts of his bravery. Yet I am too well persuaded that he is not equal to such a command. Many qualities independent of personal courage are requisite to form a good officer. Among these, activity claims a first rank. Indeed, it is indispensably necessary. Of this, I fear, he does not possess a sufficient share. The men under his command were his relatives, all his friends, the kids he raised. He refused to just throw them away. Obviously, the Continental Army thought that these people were expendable, that you could just throw them in as cannon fire. And Newcomb did not do that. He tried to use his head and try to use them to their best service. He had a cousin He was a lieutenant colonel. His name was Isaac Preston. He was a lieutenant colonel in Newcomb's brigade. General Washington sent a letter around and wrote a letter that Lieutenant Colonel Preston's militia unit has deserted him and that effectual measures should be applied to prevent this from happening to other units. Very embarrassing for this man. This man resigned, but his resignation was not accepted because the records say that he commanded his regiment in service and in consequence of a severe, fatiguing, and dangerous expedition against the enemy. Then at Brunswick, about the 25th of February, he was seized with a violent disease of which he died in camp in a wet tent. This was the last words he wrote to his family, since we don't have any last words from General Newcomb. It is as cruel as the grave to any man when he knows his own rectitude of conduct, to have his hard services not only debased and underrated, but, he stops here, but revolutionary soldiers are not the only people that endure obloquy, an old word. He was buried at Christ Churchyard, along with Silas Newcomb, although he has a stone. There is no stone for Silas Newcomb, even if you could find the place he was buried. Are there any questions about General Silas Newcomb? But you see, he was out of the war early. That's why you've never heard of him and everything like that. But he was a compassionate person, and he was no fool, and he was cantankerous, ornery, like me. Secondly, we're going to turn to the militia here. It's called the battle. This is going to show you the caliber of the people we had in the South Jersey, Reed, West Jersey militia. During the terrible winter of 1777 to 1778, both General Lord Howe in Philadelphia and General Washington in Valley Forge, a day's march north, needed fresh food to ward off scurvy and starvation. Each sent out foragers to strip the surrounding countryside and interfere with the enemy foraging parties. In February 1778, Brigadier General Mad Anthony Wayne was ordered into southern New Jersey with a small force to buy or take livestock, fodder, and foodstuffs from the local residents and get these supplies to the Continental Army. General Howe countered this by sending a force of 4,000 soldiers. General Wayne, however, was too fast for them. He crossed the Delaware and moved northward, gathering what he could and forcing the residents to take what he could not carry out of reach of the British or have them destroyed. He occasionally skirmished with the chasing British, but recrossed at Trenton 250 head of cattle for Valley Forge, actually saved that army. Now, in Cumberland County, there was a British unit, a loyalist unit, called the Queen's Rifles. So ultimately called the Queen's Rangers. They were dressed in green uniforms. They were people from Cumberland County who were still loyal to the British Crown. They were used in the Battle of Long Island, and many of them are still stationed in Cumberland County. I don't know if anybody remembers Rogers Rangers. You remember them from the French and Indian War? Well, this Colonel Rogers, he's the one actually, the one that discovered and arrested Nathan Hale and turned him over to the British. He was the commander of this. I don't know if he was in South Jersey at this time, but they were his troops. In March 1778, General Howe sent another 1,200 men under Colonel Charles Mawhood to force Mad Anthony into battle, who by this time was safely in Burlington, New Jersey. On St. Patrick's Day, Mawhood crossed the Delaware into Salem County with his force of British light regulars, Loyalist companies of New Jersey Volunteers, and Queen's Rangers, identifiable by their green uniforms. Patriot forces took up defensive positions at two bridges the British would have to cross. In Salem, Colonel Mawhood was warned by Loyalists that Militia Colonel Asher Holmes and 300 volunteers were 3 miles away at Hancock's Bridge, busy taking up the planking. At dawn the next day, Mawhood displayed a portion of his force and then pretended to retreat. The planks were hastily laid back, and 200 Americans gave chase and were met with a bloody surprise. The British attempted to cross the bridge a second time, but were stopped by Colonel Elijah Hand and his militia arriving with 2 cannon. 30 to 40 Americans were lost, mostly by drowning. Mulhood tried again to cross the bridge the next morning, but the local militia could not be dislodged. The Battle of Quinton's Bridge was over. He then detached Major Simcoe's Queen's Rangers, many of whom were Loyalist locals, to the other bridge. Simcoe's force maneuvered through the boggy terrain to the north end of Hancock's Bridge. There they surprised 20 to 30 men stationed in the house of Royal Judge and Quaker William Hancock. The British massacred everyone in the house, non-combatant Quakers as well as armed militia who tried to surrender. The upper floors of the house were awash in blood. Under strict orders not to harm Judge Hancock, mistaken intelligence had him out of the house, but he had returned earlier just in time to be bayoneted. Enraged by the complete failure of his mission, Colonel Mulhood sent an ultimatum to Colonel Hand. The militia in rebellion will surrender their arms, and all persons bearing arms will be attacked. Their houses and fields will be burned, reducing them, their unfortunate wives and children, to beggary and distress. This is the reply of Colonel Hand. I don't know, do you remember in World War II, who was it, General Macaulay, replied to the German demand for surrender? Remember what he said?
Nuts.
Nuts. This is what this young Elijah Hand said. I have been favored with what you say humanity has induced you to propose. It would have given me much pleasure to have found that humanity had been the line of conduct to your troops since you have come to Salem, not only denying quarters, but butchering our men who surrendered themselves prisoners in the skirmish at Quinton Bridge last Thursday and bayoneting yesterday morning at Hancock's Bridge in the most cruel manner, in cold blood. Men who were taken by surprise in a situation in which they neither nor did attempt to make any resistance, and some of whom were not fighting men, are instances too shocking for me to relate, and I hope for you to hear. The brave are ever generous and humane. After expressing your sentiments of humanity, you proceed to make a request which I think you would despise us if we complied with. Your proposal that we should lay down our arms, we absolutely reject. We have taken them up to maintain rights that are dearer to us than our lives, and will not lay them down till either success has crowned our cause with victory, or, like many ancient worthies contending for liberty, we meet with an honorable death. You mention that if we reject your proposal, you will put arms into the hands of the Tories against us. We have no objection to the measure, for it would only serve to fill our arsenals with arms. Your threat to wantonly burn and destroy our homes and other property and reduce our wives and children to beggary and distress is a sentiment which my humanity almost forbids me to recite, and induces me to imagine that I am reading the cruel order of a barbarous Attila, and not of a gentleman brave, generous, polished, and genteel. This man, that was beautiful language. That's the kind of people that were fighting against the British. I want to sum this up. Belief that this invasion and violence was brought on by General Mad Anthony Wayne's expedition through South Jersey served to heighten tensions between Washington and New Jersey officials. The area had been left to its own defenses during the winter of 1777-78, and they demanded continental troops. Washington sent a small detachment, too few to prevent the crumbling of South Jersey's militia organizations. Captain Barry of the Continental Navy was burning all the salt hay on either side of the Delaware River. Fearing that farms were being burned and an expected French blockade, Howe evacuated Philadelphia. And the truth is that it was this rebellion in South Jersey that forced him to abandon Philadelphia. His men were starving and could get nothing up the Delaware River. They crossed the state. Washington got right on their heels and caught up with them at Monmouth Courthouse. And it was a great victory for our side. And that's our presentation.
Thank you. That was a great presentation, and I appreciated your candor in.
I do this many times, and we have what we call the senses. We go back to the 18th century by our senses, and this is the sense of smell. It's tobacco smoke, which hardly anybody smells anymore. We have taste, we have touch, we have smell, we have hearing. We have all the senses. I just want to give you that little piece of sensual stimulation.
Let me just a question for you.
Sure.
You're from where, Doug?
I presently live in Dorothy. I lived in Weymouth Township all my life.
Okay. And what was your occupation?
I worked in the nuclear medicine department at it used to be Burdett Tolman Hospital. Now it's Cape Regional Medical Center.
And how long have you been studying and interested in the American Revolution?
Well, all my life, I suppose. I have the soldiers and the whole bit. Also, I'm the historian of Weymouth Township. I'm the curator of their museum, which is a very lovely museum. I also put displays of themed displays in the Atlantic County libraries. Like this last month, I had one of the Lenape Indians. I've had them in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, things like that. And my genealogy, I got hooked on that, and now that's like taken over my life. And that's it.
Well, I want to tell you what I appreciate about your presentation. First of all, it was very, very accurate. You didn't try to gild the lily and make someone into Saint Newcomb. But on the other hand, where he did a great job, you brought that out. And I think that's important because so many times reputations, even today, can be destroyed by someone else's opinion in the fit of jealousy. And I just want to thank you and tell you that we appreciate it.